It really hit me that Nick Saban is no longer Alabama's head coach when Kalen DeBoer took the podium. That was a pretty surreal moment in a lot of ways. It felt like the official changing of the guard, but nonetheless, man, you look at Alabama and what they have in front of them. Vegas still loves Alabama. They give them the 5th best odds to win the national championship. Now, the Alabama naysayers are saying, well, hey, Saban's not there. They lost a lot of production on defense. I'll just say this. For Alabama, it is a different set of rules you play by when you assess that roster. Like new, a lot of places, or unproven equals, we'll see. At Alabama, there's still some we'll see baked into that, but I think a lot more confidence should be had because of how many stars a lot of those guys have next to their name. I said at the top of the show as well in our narratives we're not buying segment. Did Nick Saban catch any passes? Did Nick Saban throw any touchdowns? Did he make any plays on defense? No, he was the head coach at Alabama. What he brought to the table and what made them so successful from where I'm standing was what he did from a talent acquisition standpoint, from a game plan and adapting to the game kind of standpoint, and probably most importantly, from a standard setting standpoint. And so the question I would have then for Alabama, as Kalen DeBoer has a different tone of voice when he talks to the media and probably to his football team, period, is, okay, well, is a different level of intensity or a different volume, rather, does that change the standard internally at Alabama? And I had that question really for the better part of the early time when he was hired at Bama, really all the way until spring football. But then we got to that spring game, and I watched Jalen Milroe on that final series of the spring game in a glorified scrimmage where he's not battling for his QB1 job necessarily, be just, furious at the way that drive finished. And it's one instance, you try not to pin too much on one snapshot of a moment, but at the same time, Jalen Milroe throwing his helmet, I was like, man, it's very Saban-esque. That's very reminiscent of those Alabama national championship closing moments where you got the quarterback and the center arguing on the very last drive about snap count or execution or whatever when they're about to win the national championship. Like, they're still pushing for more. And so, again, it's one moment. You're not trying to take too much away from it. But if that is a peek into what Alabama is going to be internally, that temperature is still cranked all the way up to championship level. Now, I think a lot of people, and myself included, had the question early on, well, like, hey, is Kalen DeBoer too normal to be the head coach at Bama? And I don't think it's a fair thought to have it from the jump. But when you start to unpack it a little bit more, like, I think that Kalen DeBoer and his communication style is tailored perfectly to where college football is and where college football is headed. Because where are we right now in this sport? Players, both on your roster and on other rosters, have more options than they've ever had before. Mobility is at an all-time high. And so if you are going to be the military sergeant to me, I might respond well to that. There's also a chance that I don't respond well to that. I think right now in college football, being able to have a dialogue with your players and being able to communicate in a way to where they feel valued and respected, not that Nick Saban didn't do that, I think that matters more than ever before. And I think that's something that Kalen DeBoer, quite frankly, majors in. And Nick Saban even would probably attest to this, and I think has attested to this at different points. He had to adapt his communication style. He had to sort of evolve in that way. And Nick Saban, one of the best evolvers and adapters in the sport, period, had to do that. And so for Kalen DeBoer, the way that he speaks to his players and the way that he communicates, I think that's going to benefit him long term. So the too normal narrative, it's a fair question to have to a degree, but I also think overall, again, it's just going to favor him and benefit him as we move into modern college football. You have to treat your players, quite frankly, like pros. In the NFL, you don't really scream at your players like that. You don't really yell at your players to the same way that you may be used to in college football. And I'm not telling you what's right or wrong. I think a lot of players respond well to volume, but I think that we're trending towards that professional model, professionalization period of college football, and the player-coach communication is another factor that's, I think, going to play into that. Now, you look at Alabama, too. I think one thing that benefits them long-term, too, and benefits them in 2024 is the edge this team has might be a little bit slept on. We talked about it on the Andy Staples show this morning. A lot of these guys, now I'll rephrase that, every one of these guys, according to Jalen Milroe, picked Alabama. Like, they didn't have the Hayes Fawcett graphic the same way that you do when you commit to a school. But when Nick Saban left Alabama, every single one of these players had a chance to leave. And so everyone who's on the roster right now had to recommit to Bama, recommit to Kalen DeBoer. And so you pair that with the way that last season finished for a lot of these guys on this roster. They've been through some hard things. That final snap in the Rose Bowl, for it to not go the way that you would have liked for it to go and to have some issues getting the execution done, I guarantee you that was heartbreaking. That takes a toll on you. Emotionally, within your team, it takes a toll. Like failing to reach your goals and failure to achieve the ultimate prize, like that's upsetting. That hurts. That can fragment a team a little bit if you don't handle it the right way and you don't have the right standards and way of doing things in-house, in place to deal with that. And so going back to what I was saying, the difficult things they've had to go through has hardened them, I believe. And when you're able to become a hardened organization the way that I believe Alabama is right now, all that breeds for them is going to be poise. It breeds poise. And poise, as we've seen multiple times throughout big games and especially in the national championship / college football playoff kind of setting, that's a difference maker. I mean, look at Michigan last year. They were able to, I think, be so successful in those big games towards the end of the year, especially without their head coach, because of the difficult spots they'd been in previously. J.J. McCarthy, he had played in the college football playoff game before, had struggled, had failed. I think that failure benefited him and the rest of this roster into what they wanted to do in 2023 and ultimately accomplish in 2023. So we look long-term at Alabama. We look long-term at what Kalen DeBoer is going to be there. The metrics for success for him, the key variables, they're the same for him as everyone else in the sport. Can you adapt to where the sport is headed, and can you sustain? Well, you look at what Kalen DeBoer has done so far in college football, 104-12 as a head coach. You don't stumble into that. Like, there's no, there's no asterisk next to 104-12 if you're Kalen DeBoer. So in 2024, I said at the top of the show, Bama's still Bama. Now, what does that look like? Remains to be seen. You're going to ask a lot of the defense. That's the major hinge point, I think, for them ultimately winning the SEC in 2024. But to assume they're not still Bama, to assume Kalen DeBoer isn't going to have a really good chance to be successful just because Nick Saban isn't there anymore doesn't mean Bama's not still going to be a force. So the outlook in 2024 for Bama, the goals don't change. Not just from a fan base level with expectations, but I'm talking about long term. I'm talking about at the internal level. This team still expects to compete at the highest level, and the internal temperature, from what I can tell, still reflects that, and that is a good thing for everyone in Tuscaloosa. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also, be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.